Okay, so we know that there's going to be civil war in China between the nationalists and the communists. So this all comes about because Chiang Kai-shek had promised democracy and political rights to all Chinese, but his government became pretty corrupt. Many of his supporters were bankers and government officials, business people. So not really able to relate to the majority of the population of China, which were the working class or farmers. So a lot of the peasants believed that Chiang Kai-shek was actually doing very little to improve their lives. And so as a result, many of them begin to support the Chinese Communist Party. So in order to enlist support of the peasants, Mao Zedong, who ends up becoming the leader of the Communist Party of China, he divides the land that the communists won among the local farmers. So that's immediately going to win people to his side, because remember that there had been very strict land owning policies in China. So the nationalists and the communists, they're going to clash. What ends up happening in about 1927, nationalist troops and armed gangs are going to move into Shanghai. They end up killing many of the communist leaders and trade union members that had been there, just right there in the city streets. So killings took place in other cities as well, and the nationalists at this point had almost wiped out the Communist Party completely. So when Chiang Kai-shek became president of the Nationalist Republic of China in 1928, both Great Britain and the United States formally recognized this as the new government. Because of the slaughter of the communists in Shanghai, the Soviet Union did not, because remember that the Soviet Union at this point is also communist as well. So by 1930, the nationalists and the communists are in a full-out bloody civil war. Mao Zedong and other communist leaders, they are going to establish themselves in the hills of south central China. Mao Zedong is going to be able to recruit peasants to join his Red Army. They are going to end up going on what is called the Long March. So the nationalists had attacked the communists repeatedly, over and over and over again. They had been attacked. The communists had been attacked by the nationalists, but the nationalists had not been very successful in driving them out. Okay, so the Nationalist Party has about 700,000 men. This is the Nationalist Party, 700,000 men, while the communists only have about 100,000 men. So they're outnumbered big time, 7-1, completely outnumbered here. The Nationalist Army is going to then surround the communist mountain stronghold, because they had gone up into the mountains, and knowing that they were outnumbered, the communist leaders end up realizing they are facing defeat. So what they end up doing is they flee. They begin a 6,000-mile long march. It takes them over the course of a year. So between 1934 and 1935, the communists are staying just barely a step ahead of the Nationalist Party. Finally, after a little bit more than a year, Mao Zedong and the 7,000 or 8,000 communist survivors, they end up settling into caves in northwestern China. And they end up gaining a few new followers. But meanwhile, this civil war, as this has all been going on between the nationalists and the communists, Japan is going to see this as the opportunity for them to invade. But before we get to that, let me give you a few more details about the Long March. So over the course of the year, they were following the red lines here that you can see on their map. They went over 18 mountain ranges. One of them included the Snowy Mountains, which is has some of the highest mountains in the world. They crossed over 24 rivers. Each man had to carry 10 days worth of food and fuel, so like fire, so they could stay warm. Enough to last for 10 days. And they marched for about 6 to 7 hours a day. So we know that Mao Zedong becomes the leader of the communists in China. And I told you a minute ago that Japan is going to invade China at this point. So rewind just a minute. I'm sorry. But go back just a little bit, back to Mao Zedong. So the idea of communism is going to really appeal to the peasants, because it's going to fix the land ownership policies, and it's also going to fix the tax system. So they're not going to be taxed as heavily, and they're going to be able to own more land, which means that they're going to be able to provide for their families. Okay, now let's talk about Japan. So you can see here on the map that all of this red area right up here, this was Japan in the Japanese Empire in 1870. Okay, all of this other colored area here, this pink, this yellow, the green, the funky brown color here, this kind of yellowish color, the two shades of purple down here in Southeast Asia, all of this area here is going to be occupied by Japan between the year of 1932 to 1942. So within 10 years, they had taken that much control over the land here in Asia, in Southeast Asia. So why were they doing this? Well, we know that they have become a very imperialistic country. We also know that they were searching for raw materials, and they also were wanting to become a world power. So they're showing off their power. This is their way to show off that, hey, look, we are somebody to pay attention to. We are somebody to take serious. They end up taking over Korea, Manchuria, China, and eventually into Southeast Asia as well. So a minute ago when I told you that Japan was invading China during the middle of the Chinese Civil War, what's going to end up happening is that the nationalists and the communists, even though they are at odds against one another, they are eventually going to end up having to come together to fight against the Japanese. All right, but not everything is going so great for Japan. So they're having some problems at home as well. So they've had a population growth. So this is then going to lead to immigration. They're also going to need more raw materials and people to trade with. So they're looking for some trading partners as well. And also they're going to have labor union issues. So with the industrialization that has happened in their country, they also have unsafe factories, long hours, poor wages, the same sort of thing we have heard time and time again this year. So your working class in Japan, they also are going to turn to socialism and communism, and they view this as a way to fix their economy as well. Japan's also going to focus on building up its military strength because they are afraid that if there's anybody who is unhappy, if the people of Japan are unhappy with the way that their government is going, with the way that things are going, that this could be a problem in the future for their military victory. So in other words, they might not be as successful in any battles or wars that they might be involved in if the people of their country are not happy with the way things are going and willing to support the military. So how does the world respond to all of this totalitarian aggression? Now, you'll remember that after World War I, we had here in the United States, we had the Great Depression that we dealt with. But the rest of the world also was dealing with an economic depression as well. So there's not going to be any challenge from the West when all of this totalitarian aggression is going on throughout the world, whether it's in Italy or whether it's in Germany or in China, India. When we see any of this sort of stuff going on, there's really not going to be any challenge to it because everybody else has their own problems that they're dealing with at home at this point in time. So you should remember the League of Nations. We know that the League of Nations failed. You should remember that there were two main goals of the League of Nations. The first one was to maintain peace throughout the world. The second one was to keep any future wars from happening. Well, we know that that doesn't happen because we know our next unit is our World War II unit. So it failed for a couple of reasons. There was no power for it to enforce its policies. There wasn't anybody willing to send their troops over to enforce the decisions that the League of Nations had made. Also, so this is going to be why we're able to see Italy is able to take over Ethiopia. Remember last class we talked about how Mussolini had invaded Ethiopia. And this is also how Japan was able to move in and take over Manchuria as well. So those are our notes for this unit. Please make sure that you have taken care of the rest of your C-note summaries. Make sure you have all of those done. We'll collect those next class, next time I see you.